of the Heritage Foundation. Repeat it. Welcome to the fentanyl crisis, the Mexico-Texas connection. Please welcome Dr. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation.
Thanks for that. Here are important, but this one it's an example. It should not be a Democratic issue. Should be an issue. It's a human issue. Really looking forward to the conversation. The influx of drugs from the United States border and the thousands dying as a result is really a tragedy. Of the current flood a group of the drug country. Of course, death a clandestine run by Mexicans who source their characters from China. Unfortunately, drug abusers are often unaware that fentanyl is present in the consuming and how it can be even in the smallest. Fentanyl illicit drug dealers to prey by with small doses, production costs, potency drugs. As fentanyl becomes more prevalent in the streets of American communities because of increased demand for products, so count. It's accounted for 20 of the 30 opioid-related 15. Synthetic opioids, 83% of 88,000 opioid-related by 2020. So not unique to Texas. Epidemic this day. 2020, 100 were reported. Stop the free flow of lethal entering the United States. Southern border fentanyl. Drug overdose annually. Firearms or vehicle. The drug abuse is pressing and challenging concerns. Concerned about this deadly, my friend Texas. The state of Texas has with local law enforcement and communities the deadliest drug crisis in our nation's history. In
the current administration, their hands are pretty much tied. For the most part, the Border Patrol has been turned into paper processors of those who are apprehended across the border. They process the paperwork and then they release them into the United States, which is completely unacceptable, but also contrary to the laws passed by the United States Congress. We have a president, we have a Secretary of Mayorkas who are not following the laws passed by Congress. The president and Secretary of Mayorkas need to be held accountable by Congress for their failure to comply with the laws of the United States of America. They took an oath to enforce and uphold the laws of the United States Constitution and the laws passed by the United States Congress, and they have abandoned that oath of office and must be held accountable. Because they have abandoned that oath of office, because of the massive inflow of people coming across the border, Texas is not going to sit idly by. We're going to step up and do everything we possibly can for Texas to do the federal government's job to secure the border, especially when we see extraordinarily dangerous situations coming across the border, one of which is what you talked about, and that is fentanyl. But fentanyl, understand this, is just one of the challenges that we see coming across the border. There's, in addition to fentanyl, we have human smugglers, we have human traffickers, we have gangs, these international drug cartels who are operating on both sides of the border, posing extraordinary dangerous situations in Texas, but also elsewhere. Let's talk about the fentanyl situation. Listen, I know you have other members of the panel there today, and I know them, and I want to express my gratitude to them for what they've done in the past and what they're doing currently to try to work with federal and state authorities to step up and address the situation. But the situation has risen to such high profile that it's time for all hands on deck. Texas will continue to step up, and I'll tell you more about what we're doing, but we need all of America to step up. Kevin, I heard some of what you were saying. I didn't hear you say this, and perhaps you did, but even if you did, it's worth reminding the entire crowd to understand the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with. If you look at the age group of people between 18 and 45, over the past year, the leading cause of death is not COVID, it's not cancer, it's not car wrecks, it's not guns. The leading cause of death for that age group is fentanyl, and it's devastating. Overnight, over the past 24 hours, it was reported here in Austin, Texas, where I'm located, that there's been a massive increase in overdoses of fentanyl, including deaths right here in Austin, Texas. And these are all people who, for the most part, they're not common drug users or whatever the case may be. They may have purchased a drug off the street, perhaps for party purposes, whatever the case may be. But like in so many cases with regard to fentanyl these days, one pill can kill, even if they're not a common drug user or opioid addict. And that's exactly what happened in Austin, Texas. My point in telling you this, and that is when we have fentanyl coming across the border, it doesn't stay at the border. It doesn't even stay in Texas. It goes to communities across the entire United States of America, just like the example I gave you for Austin, Texas. And so this is an extraordinarily dangerous and deadly situation. So think about this, if you would, for a second. This is one of the most deadly situations we have in the United States of America. Kevin, can you or anybody in the audience watching this or listening to this today, can you think of a time when the President of the United States has stepped up and talked about this and doing something about this? I can't. And so we have people losing their lives in Texas alone the past year. There have been about 1,300 people who lost their lives because of fentanyl. And when you look at what's going on nationally, I think the number may be approaching 100,000 people. That is extraordinary, but it's even more perhaps alarming that despite those deaths, we have a president who is refusing to even talk about it, to recognize it, to step up and do anything about it. We have a president whose obligation it is to secure our border, to secure our sovereignty, but to protect people from situations like this. He should be amassing more Border Patrol, giving more Border Patrol more authority to more aggressively go after this. Because they're not doing that, Texas, as you pointed out, is having to do it. We've done something unprecedented in amassing 10,000 National Guard as well as Texas Department of Public Safety officers to seize these drugs, to make arrests of people coming across the border, to use whatever tools and strategies we can, including what you referenced, of something that if you go back to the beginning of the history of the United States up until today, there has been no state in the history of the country that has been required to build its own border wall. Texas is now building a border wall, which is the exact same border wall that President Trump put up. We're using the same contractors that Trump was used. In fact, we're even using some of the same wall that President Trump used, because many of you may remember after Biden took over as presidency, the walls that you, the taxpayers, paid for were laying on the ground. And we were able to obtain some of those wall components that were laying on the ground and able to put them up, now securing the Texas border. We're having to do all of this in part to address this massive inflow of fentanyl and seize the fentanyl that you were talking about. It's stunning when you think, as you told the audience, that we have seized enough fentanyl to kill more than 200 million Americans. Think what it would be like if Texas were not on the border, securing the border. Those are drugs that would be disseminated across the entire United States of America. There would be more Americans dying today if it were not for what Texas is doing on the border. I do want to say this, and that is, There are other states that have joined Texas in this cause. There are other states where we've had people coming in from these other states, National Guard, law enforcement officers working with us to make sure as a team, the states will step up and begin to address the challenges that the federal government has caused by their abandonment of the responsibility of securing the border. Just know this, and that is Texas will continue to fight this. One last thing that I know that my time is almost up. A couple of weeks ago, I met with family members who have lost a son or a daughter because of fentanyl death. There's a growing number of these parents that we are working in collaboration with them on policy initiatives, where Texas, for example, will be working to pass additional policies that will crack down on this. I did sign a law that making it a felony to manufacture or distribute fentanyl in the state of Texas. However, we need to understand this, and that is people who are dying because of fentanyl, they're not dying because of overdoses of people who traditionally repeatedly take opioids or things like that. They're taking a drug, a pill, for the first time, and it'll kill them. There are laws in some other states that Texas wants to adopt that will make it a felony for people to pass a pill out to someone who lose their life. We need to change the dynamics of this. This is not a fentanyl. The terminology of this is not a fentanyl overdose. This is poisoning by fentanyl, which we want to make a murder crime in the state of Texas. I think coming from the states up, we can send a message to the federal government, send a message to America, but most importantly, send a message to the people who are trafficking in these drugs, that if you traffic in these drugs, if you give one of these drugs to somebody and somebody dies from it, you could be prosecuted for murder. And that's the approach that Texas wants to take. But Kevin, going back, listen, I want to thank you for putting a spotlight on this issue so that we as a country can step up and do something about it. And when we do so, not only will we be making our border area safer, but we will be saving lives because we are explaining to the public exactly what's going on concerning fentanyl. And we will collectively, as states, address the issue, even though the federal government is abandoning its job. So Kevin, thank you for once again helping to lead the way.
Let me at the outset thank Governor Abbott for his remarks, but even more importantly, thank him for what he's doing. I'm one of the people who believe that there are two types of jobs in this world: saving lives and everything else. And what you're doing right now, Governor, and what our panelists have tried to do and will continue to try to do, puts them in that first category. Since I now have a son who's just recently become a Texan, I have a personal thanks that I want to give to the governor and everybody in Texas to make Texas a better place. You're doing God's work if you're trying to save lives. And what we're trying to do today is educate people about the problem and its importance. With that, let me ask our panelists to take a seat, and I will give you a very brief introduction because anything or everything I say is far less important than anything any of them have to say. Our first speaker will be United States Congressman Brian Babin. Brian Babin is the congressman for the 36th District of Texas in the U.S. House of Representatives. Before his election to Congress in 2014, he served the people of Woodville, Texas in several capacities, including mayor, city councilman, member of the Woodville Independent School District Board, director of the Tyler County Chamber of Commerce, and as a dentist, perhaps the most important of all the jobs he had. Prior to running for elected office, Dr. Babin proudly served as a captain in the United States Air Force, and he has served in both the Texas Army National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve. He holds an undergraduate degree from Lamar University and a Doctor of Dental Surgery degree from the University of Texas Health Science Center. Next, we will hear from Mr. Uttam Dhillon. He served as the 15th director of Interpol from 2020 to 21, but more importantly, as the acting administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration from 2018 to 2020. Before that, he served as deputy counsel to the president and deputy assistant to the president. He has also served as director for the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Counter-Narcotics Enforcement, as an associate deputy attorney general, and as an assistant attorney general, where he saw what is actually happening on the street and at the trial level that works its way up to events like this. He has an undergraduate degree from California State University, a master's degree from the University of California, San Diego, and a law degree from the Bolt Hall Law School at the University of California, Berkeley. Our third speaker will be Mr. Mark Morgan. As you heard Kevin say, he is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He served as the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol and acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. But he had a long career protecting the public even before that. Previously, he had spent more than 20 years as a special agent and supervisory special agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as doing tours as a deputy sheriff in Platte County, Missouri, and a police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. He also served in the United States Marine Corps. He holds
un-American socialist no-goods, and I could go on for the rest of my time up here, but I'll spare you and save that for another time. Folks, this is an incredible collection of conservative leaders up here today that I'm proud to be here with, and they fight tirelessly to secure our southern border. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to join them and to say a few words to all of you. I'm very grateful to be in a position as first and foremost a Texan. I want to say thanks to my governor, Governor Greg Abbott, who has been stepping to the fore on this border problem. I appreciated his words. Of the Security Caucus of the House of Representatives, I'm a member of the American Security Task Force to help publicly call attention to Biden's and Harris's dangerous refusal to enforce laws and protect our southern border, and by extension, and another one on this task force, when we retake the majority, not if, but when we retake the majority, to start putting in place and these policies back again to something that will be pro-American. Folks, these are very dangerous and difficult times. We're here at a time in history where extreme America-hating left is in control of our most sacred institutions. AOC is our de facto Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Kamala Harris is calling the shots as our, quote, border czar. The liberal media, which is our fourth branch of our government, has sold their souls and now operate in a moral wasteland where there's no bar too low, no lie they won't tell to protect their Democrat colleagues, and no truth that they will tell if it supports the Republicans. After a destructive year of the Biden administration and a Democrat-controlled Congress, really nothing shocks me anymore, and you all may feel the exact same way. Major, colossal, historic things are happening one after the other so frequently that now we seem to just skim past the headlines these days, not even batting an eyelash. Honestly, it's very hard to remember all of them. 1 minute it's TSA allowing illegal aliens to fly using warrants as ID. The next it's caravans of thousands of migrants camped out under a bridge in a small town Texas, under this bridge. And just a side note on that issue, that since we all know what caravan I'm talking about, the city of Del Rio in Texas has a population of 5,000 people and roughly 15,000 people crammed under one of the bridges. Folks, that's nearly half of the population of that town that were camped out underneath that bridge. It's unconscionable. Can you imagine the horrible impact that that had on the citizens of Del Rio? Well, I know, because I've talked to some of these citizens. Americans treated like second-class in favor of those who break our laws, who come here illegally and do unbelievable amounts of damage, as you heard the governor said just a second ago about the fentanyl problems. I'm not one for hyperbole, but the Democrat Party is truly trampling on our sacred Constitution. Why? I think for two reasons: the maintenance of their political power and maintaining their majorities. States of America. We're witnessing the collapse of common sense and the rise of woke socialist policies and ideals. Folks, these decisions are deliberate and they're well planned. It's not incompetence. Don't ever fall into that trap. They don't care. It's purely cynical politics, and frankly, it's cynical politics from elected officials who don't even share a border with Mexico. And I wish someone from the Biden administration could explain to me how enforcing our immigration laws and securing our borders is cruel or inhumane. We'll even think about that. It's inhumane to not secure the border of the United States of America. Inhumane is letting thousands of Haitians, including children, sleep outside for days. What's inhumane is letting women and children be trafficked, assaulted, raped, and even murdered. And when you get a chance, just ask CBP about the rape trees. Instead of fruit, these trees bear the undergarments of innocent women and children. What's inhumane is letting heroin, meth, marijuana, counterfeit pills that the governor was talking about. You're thinking you're taking an Adderall, or you're thinking you're taking some prescription drug, and it's laced with a deadly, lethal dose of fentanyl. And this fentanyl is coming across our border in historic amounts. The inhumanity of this is 100,000 plus Americans, not just people, our people. 100,000 Americans died of an overdose of just last year alone from drugs that were mostly smuggled through our southern border. The inhumanity is that loving mothers and fathers all over this country will never hear their children's voices again because they were unintentionally exposed to this deadly poison of fentanyl. The number one killer for Americans age 18 to 45, my friends, is overdose of drugs. This is the real inhumanity, the real crisis that is happening. As you all know, fentanyl is frighteningly deadly, 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, and just 2 milligrams can actually kill you. I'm a dentist by profession. I used to do a lot of operating room procedures in the early part of my career, and fentanyl belongs in the operating room. That's where it belongs, not on our streets. Or Austin, Texas, or Woodville, Texas, or any other place. It has no purpose outside of the hands of a trained anesthesiologist in the operating room. Dangerous, its potency. Hearing that kids, started vaping fentanyl. Folks, I'm the father of 5 kids and a grandfather of 17 beautiful little ones, and my stomach drops when I hear this. The most maddening thing, completely, this danger is self-inflicted. I'm not up here to talk about other issues, but the crises that this country has faced that have been created by this president and his administration are innumerable. Democrats are proudly choosing all of these dangers, all because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made a campaign promise to open border radicals in their own party. Think about that. Let that sink in for a minute. They made a promise on the stage when they were running for president, and they have kept that promise. Just this week, 2 high school students from the same school in Portland, Oregon, died of accidental fentanyl overdoses within 24 hours of each other. Portland is more than 1,000 miles from any part of our southern border. So every state in this nation is a border state. Unbelievable. And I will tell you something else. The Mexican drug cartels are not just in Mexico. They are inside the United States of America today. And speaking of Oregon, they are inside the state of Oregon. They are in control of the illegal growing of marijuana farms and things of this nature in Oregon and well. 2 million illegal aliens crossed our borders in 2021, roughly the population of Houston, Texas, which I am proudly representing a portion of that county and that city. We estimate that there is one border agent for every 0.39 miles of the southwest border. That's a lot of space for one border agent, and Mark Morgan knows that better than anyone. That's a lot of space. We can't even surmise just how many drug smugglers have made it through that were undetected. We know that gotaways are probably up there just last year, probably close to 400,000 or so. A few weeks ago in Del Rio, Texas, Border Patrol agents apprehended 3 suspects smuggling drugs. One of them had a backpack with 44 pounds of fentanyl in it. That tiny, 0.44 pounds of that tiny amount of fentanyl, 0.44, would be enough to kill just shy of 100,000 people, and sells for about $150 per gram, and that's on the low end. The White House has promised, quote, bold new solutions aimed at keeping Americans alive. Are they serious? How could they be? How could you not laugh at that statement? Is the solution not beyond obvious? The best way to stop the overdose epidemic of our young loved ones, our sons, our daughters, our mothers, our fathers, brothers, and sisters is to simply secure the southern border. Stop the flood of illicit drugs into the country. Stop it entirely. It's not rocket scientists to figure this out. We listened to Democrats go on and on for 4 years about how inhumane the border policies of Donald Trump were and that administration. But where are they now? Why are they? We don't hear a peep from them. They can't be bothered to keep fentanyl off our streets and out of our high schools. They can't be bothered to permanently classify fentanyl as a Schedule I drug. They can't be bothered to give a hoot about our kids or you or frankly any of the migrants that are coming across in droves either. And like I said, Biden and the Democrats are not done.
Cooperation with U.S. law enforcement, which is largely the Drug Enforcement Administration in Mexico. We did return when I say we, I was not at DEA at the time. I should actually say that everything I'm telling you is open source material. I was not involved in this process at all. But the Department of Justice did return this individual to Mexico and in fact provided evidence of his criminal activity. The Mexican government decided that that evidence was not sufficient to either convict him in the U.S. or Mexico, and in fact accused the Drug Enforcement Administration of fabricating the evidence. The U.S. Objected to that, said that was not the case, and the Wall Street Journal noted that the Justice Department's response, this is a quote, might mark the lowest point in bilateral cooperation against criminal organizations since the abduction and killing of the DEA agent Kiki Camarena in 1985. The relationship did get worse. The Mexican legislature passed a law that basically made it impossible for federal law enforcement, U.S. federal law enforcement, to work in Mexico. Essentially, it would require a DEA agent to report to the Mexican government everything he or she was doing or knew or the intelligence they had. Given the extraordinary corruption in Mexico, that's the equivalent of basically telling the drug cartels everything you know. The bottom line is our relationship, our ability to work in Mexico, and you should know that DEA worked very actively in Mexico. All law enforcement did. FBI was there, ATF was there, DHS was there, ICE, HSI, everybody was working in Mexico. That relationship has collapsed and has not been repaired. Now, this administration has had a meeting in Mexico in October with as many Americans dying. This has to be one of, if not the single highest priority with Mexico. For example, one of the things we could ask is to grant visas to law enforcement agents. It used to take about a month for a DEA agent to get a visa granted. Now it's taking 6 months or more. Since the Biden administration came into power, we haven't seen extraditions from Mexico anymore. We were seeing a lot of extraditions from Mexico of drug traffickers, of high-level drug traffickers in the Trump administration. That stopped. So the Biden administration has a role here, and it's an important role, and it is basically to tell Mexico that they need to step up to the plate and cooperate with federal law enforcement again. We need to take the battle to the Mexican drug cartels where they live, in Mexico. And right now, the Mexican government is preventing us from doing that. So I just say that because if you look at it that way and you realize, and Mark's probably going to address this, will address this more fulsomely than I believe the Mexican cartels basically control our border now. We are in a very serious position. What can we do about it? We do have control over our side of the border. And one of the things we can do is we can round up, arrest, and prosecute drug traffickers who are related to these cartels in the United States. And it's quite remarkable how many cartel members and associates are in the United States operating. They have command and control structures right here in the United States. We proved this during the Trump administration with an operation called Project Python, which we announced in March of 2020. Project Python was designed to attack drug traffickers associated with CJNG, one of the most deadly cartels in Mexico, was designed to go after those individuals right here in the United States. It was a U.S.-only operation. It was an opportunity to demonstrate that we can effectively attack drug traffickers right here without any foreign cooperation. And we did. We arrested over, and some people might find this amazing, over 760 CJNG members over a 6-month period. People who were either members of this cartel or associates right here in the United States. So one of the things we can do, notwithstanding Mexico's failure to cooperate with us anymore, is we can really ramp up those domestic operations and do our best to destroy the command and control operations of the drug cartels right here in the United States. I'm hopeful that the administration will be launching operations like that, or they're already launched, and that we'll see the results soon. Oftentimes when I speak, it seems like a downer. Everything's going downhill. I do want to tell you that success is possible. Drug overdose deaths in the U.S. fell in 2018. They fell by a little over 5%, according to the CDC. That was the first time drug overdose deaths fell since 1990. They fell as a result of outstanding policies put into place by the previous administration. One individual who worked very hard on that was the former drug czar, Jim Carroll, who's in the audience here today. He worked very hard to attack the drug issue globally on behalf of the administration. And he demonstrated, and the entire administration demonstrated, that success is possible. So when people tell you that we can't fight this thing on the supply side, or we have to, legalize drugs, it's absolutely not true. We can succeed. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Very good.
Now hear from Mr. Mark Morgan. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul. So clearly, dealing with the drug epidemic, the drug crisis in the United States, it's complicated. And that saying it's complicated is a gross understatement of the problem. And Paul and I, we were going back and forth preparing for this, and we were having a lot of discussions. And it's complicated because there's a supply and demand challenge that's out there. There's a enforcement aspect. There's a public health treatment aspect to that. There's an education awareness, as Dhillon talked about. There's a political and a diplomatic issue to this. The list goes on and on. And I think the governor said it well, is that it really is an all-hands approach. It's really going to take a vast amount of resources and agencies from the local, state, and federal level to really address this fully like we should. I don't think we've seen that to the extent that we should. We've had some areas of success, as Uttam discussed. But look, as we go forward with this, we have to be honest with each other that this is complicated, but we can do complicated things. And there are specific areas that are pretty straightforward that I hesitate to say, but are fairly not complicated in the issue and the strategy. But it's the political will that's the challenge. And that is the border. And I want to focus on that for my time here. It's border security. And that phrase is very important, and I'll explain that in a minute. It's just one element of a very complicated enforcement element. We've got to go after the cartels. I agree completely. And that's going to be a diplomatic issue as well as an enforcement issue. We've got to go after the gangs that are in this country that act really as one of the major distribution arms of the cartels and the smugglers that operate in every city in this country. Those are very complicated things for a variety of reasons. I've got it. But so is the border. The border is a critically important issue to this. And I know it goes to the heart of the supply and demand issue. But look, I don't want to
I want to make it the 3 million migrants that tried to break into our country illegally. The 2 million we encountered, the 600,000 that got away, and the 400,000 that turned back to avoid apprehension. Every one of those paid the cartels. That illegal immigration is fueling and financing the cartel's criminal operations. It's making them stronger. It's making them more influential. It's making them more powerful. And it's also enabling their criminal schemes in other areas, including drugs, to expand. They actually utilize those 3 million migrants. They exploit them to drive and force them, many of them, to carry drugs across as they're being smuggled. They use them as a distraction technique. There are countless stories where they will send and hold 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 migrants and then put them through one area. So why? The Border Patrol has to respond there to provide the humanitarian aid, leaving the border on either side of them wide open. You know, the Congressman mentioned Del Rio, the 15,000 under that bridge. Del Rio, one of 9 sectors in that area, one of 9 sectors in the southwest border. It covers 224 miles, linear miles of our border. During that time, there was virtually not a single Border Patrol agent patrolling 224 miles of our southwest border because they were overrun by illegal immigration. So do not tell me that illegal immigration is not part and parcel to our ability to effectively secure our border. And I guarantee you, during that time, that 224 miles, there were untold amount of drugs that were pouring across this country. Not only mention that, we have areas where 50, 60% of Border Patrol agents are pulled off their national security job, right? Pulled off the job to basically be a travel agency, an Uber driver, a processing agent, right? Leaving large areas of our border wide open, unpatrolled, unmonitored. So drugs are pouring across. And look, I mentioned the seizures. Look, that's still a great output. It's still significant. It's still something we've got to focus on. But anybody who stands in front of you and talks about and pats themselves on the back on the seizures, and that's all they talk about, they're misinforming you. Because what we should be worried about is the amount of drugs we're not seizing. And with all the expertise here, nobody here can actually give you an accurate figure of the amount of drugs that are actually pouring across our border because it's wide open. But I can tell you, because of this administration's open border policies that are driving the historic levels of illegal immigration higher than we've ever seen in our history, our borders are more wide open and less secure than they ever have been. And the wall system, regardless of the amount of BS that's told by open border advocates in this administration, the wall system works. Everywhere where the wall system is utilized as part of a multi-layer strategy of infrastructure, technology, and personnel, every single measure of success went up, including their ability to seize more drugs. And look, Operation Lone Star from Texas, I have to throw my hats off to the governor. He's doing more from a state than any other governor in this country. The amount of drugs that he has seized, he has seized 40, 50,000 pounds of drugs, and that's every single drug would have made their way into every town, city, and state in this country. And I'll end with this. If we really want to get serious about a very complicated issue, there are things that we can do, like Uttam talked about, the scheduling. That's not hard. That's just common sense, right? It makes no sense not to schedule the precursors that are out there. And it makes no sense that we do not secure our borders to get, really a common sense approach and get really behind stopping the easy accessibility of the drugs, the low cost of the drugs. We secure our borders, we're going to save lives.
Amen.
I'll end it at that.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Gang, let me start the discussion with a question. Many people say the drug war has failed because we have not been able to stop illegal drug use, whether it's drugs manufactured in the U.S. or smuggled into the U.S. Well, one way of looking at the problem of illegal drug use is to break it down, at least our response to it, into 3 parts: education, enforcement, and treatment. I want to give each of you the opportunity to talk about any one of those, but I particularly encourage you, if you can, to say something about why, if you think it's true, enforcement needs to be a necessary part of our response, that we can't rely just on education or just on treatment.
Congressman, I'll give you the chance to go first if you prefer. If you want to wait, I see you making some notes to go.
I'm good. I'm ready. It absolutely has to be maintained. Enforcement absolutely must. We hear these stories. Well, we just need to legalize drugs, because if we legalize them, not only will eliminate people going to jail that shouldn't be in jail, we can actually reap benefits, from taxation and provide jobs and these types of things. Well, let me tell you something. So legalizing fentanyl's already a legal drug, but it needs to be legal and limited to to a medical anesthesiological function, and if we stopped enforcing drug enforcement, then those drugs that Governor Abbott or Uttam or Mark down there were talking about would have gotten on through and would have killed a bunch of people in towns and communities around this country. Absolutely has to be maintained. And whether we think we're going to lose the war on drugs, I think we're losing the war on drugs because we have an open border. It's not rocket science that ask for this or ask for that, and then of course at the end they always have disclaimers where everything under the sun is going to happen to you if you take this drug. I think that's something that needs to be looked at as well. But education, maintaining our war on drugs and enforcement, and thank goodness for the DEA, and thank goodness for our enforcement officers as well. I just wanted everybody you told us something today, Uttam, that I did not realize there was that much lack and a change of communication and cooperation between the Mexican government and between the DEA. I'm stunned to hear this. And you're right. I think you can't derive any conclusion from that except to think that the cartels are in control down there, if even the government.
That's right.
That's very concerning to me. Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome. Mark or Uttam? Uttam, you want to go, Mark?
So I'll just say supply matters, which means enforcement matters. The best evidence of that is how the opioid crisis started, which was prescription drugs flooding certain communities, and suddenly people were overdosing on drugs at levels we never saw before. If you believe supply matters, that means enforcement matters. Enforcement is not the only solution to this problem. You need prevention, treatment, and enforcement. You need to attack it, all three of those areas, and that is the key to success. You will never get to 100%, you will never, quote, win the war on drugs. You will never get to a point where there were no drugs, no illegal drugs, and nobody's using them and nobody is overdosing on them. But I'm confident in saying this. The number of people that are overdosing today is absolutely unacceptable, and we have to get that number way, way down, and we could do it with a three-pronged attack: prevention, treatment, and enforcement.
Amen.
So real quick, foot stomp on Uttam. Completely agree. We're a great nation on the face of the planet. We can do all of that at the same time, in my opinion. We're not doing that effectively, though. Let me give you two analogies. Look, the justice system, I'm being oversimplistic, but it's a continuum. It's a multi-layer strategy, right? So it's legislators who produce law. It's the law enforcement officers, enforcement, and prosecutors who prosecute it. If any one of those elements breaks down among that multi-layered continuum and strategy, it fails overall. We're seeing that in multiple cities now with woke DAs, right, that are not actually prosecuting criminals. They're actually focused more on the rights of the criminals than the rights of the victims. And you see it when you don't do it all, it breaks down. Same thing on the southwest border. It's a multi-layer strategy of infrastructure, technology, and personnel. If you only focus on one or two of those elements, overall it's going to fail. It's the same thing here. We need to do it all. If you only focus on one or the other, overall it's going to fail.
Gang, let me focus now on enforcement. If we have an enforcement problem, there are at least 4 ways of dealing with it. One is to change the law. The second one is to change how the law is being enforced. The third is to give the people doing the enforcement more tools. And the fourth is just to change the people who are actually enforcing the laws or giving them orders. If you were king for a day, how would you, from those different options or any others, try to enhance the enforcement prong of this 3-prong attack? let me go the other direction now. Mark, let me start with you.
I'd start with D, all of the above. First thing I'd do is I would impeach Secretary Mayorkas, right? Get rid of him, right? So let's get a secretary that's actually going to be committed to being the secretary protecting our homeland rather than the secretary protecting his personal ideology, right? Get a secretary that's actually going to enforce the laws on the books instead of being a de facto legislator and not only not enforcing the laws, but actually creating new laws. I'll give you a quick example, and there's many, many here. I think most of us know, but I mean, his enforcement priority restriction of ICE, it's unbelievable. You basically have to be a known or suspected terrorist for you to be removable. He actually said being in the country illegal is not enough to remove you. That having a court order of removal is not enough to remove you. That's in direct contradiction to the laws on the books. The other thing that I would say is policy matters. I suggest let's take a page out of the Trump era playbook, right? Let's start reinstituting those policies that work. We can do this. Like MPP was a great example of that. The INA allows it. Now, what I would suggest is the INA needs to be tweaked, and I was briefly talking this to the congressman. The INA says that we can return individuals to a contiguous country, but it says may. It doesn't say shall or must. We should change that to shall or must. So that takes the discretionary authority away from radical administrations like the one we have right now that actually did away with the most powerful, effective tool that we had in the Remain in Mexico program. And the last thing is, yeah, we do need new laws. And I'll give you just a couple examples on the southwest border that's going to allow us to better secure the border. And yes, some of them apply to illegal immigration, but I already talked about how border security is synonymous with illegal immigration. Is one of the first things we have to do is we have to fix the Florida Settlement Agreement. The Florida Settlement Agreement is a nonsensical lower court judicial outcome that said we cannot detain an unaccompanied minor or family that broke into our country for more than 20 days. We can't get them through the immigration process. That's how catch and release started. First, let's address that so that ICE can actually detain individuals. Another one is TVPRA, another nonsensical a law that was passed that if you're from a contiguous country, if you're unaccompanied minor from a contiguous country, we treat you different if you came from a non-contiguous country. So if you're from Canada or Mexico and you're unaccompanied minor, we return you to your family. If you're outside Mexico or Canada, we keep you. You know, I personally was CBP commissioner. I talked to all the leaders of my counterparts of all three Northern Triangle countries, and all of them said independently and separately to me, hey, you know, Commissioner Morgan, I don't understand. Could you do something about your laws where you stop keeping our kids, the future of our country, and give them back to us? There's just a couple examples. I could go on.
Uttam? So Mexican drug cartels, in my view, represent the greatest threat to U.S. public health and national security. So from an enforcement perspective, the federal government needs to be every element of the federal government needs to be engaged in attacking these drug cartels. We need an all-of-government approach. So from an enforcement perspective, I would say that's the way we all need to approach this problem, in a coordinated way. Oftentimes, unfortunately, people find this hard to believe, but federal law enforcement agencies don't always work as well together as they should. That needs to end. This is a big problem, and it needs the full cooperation of all federal law enforcement agencies. We should be thinking a bit out of the box here. A recent report that came out talked about fentanyl being a slow-motion weapon of mass destruction. Well, let's think about fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. What does that mean if the president were to declare fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction and bring the Department of Defense into this fight in a way they've never been in this fight before? So I just think we need to think out of the box a bit on this, and we also need to make sure we have a coordinated all-of-government approach on the enforcement front.
Congressman?
Yes, sir. I agree with everything that both these gentlemen have just talked about. Now, legislative fixes are absolutely necessary. From the interior enforcement, changing that language from may to shall, I think is an absolute necessity, and doing away with the Flores agreement, TVPRA, et cetera. Folks, we got to build that wall. We've got to build the wall. And look, I believe in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that the states, that the federal government must protect the states from invasion. And there's debate about this, but I think I appreciate what my governor's doing in Texas, helping to build the wall, and arresting people for trespassing, et cetera. because the federal government simply won't do that and then turns around and releases them. E-Verify, I think that's something that's something we need to give a tool to our companies, our employers, to let them know who they're hiring, and they can find that out in just a few minutes. Let's see. We also, and this has been suggested even during the Trump administration. There were several of us who were advocates of a new designation for the Mexican drug cartels as terrorist groups. There are some pros and cons involving that, but let me tell you something. These people are killing thousands and thousands and thousands of their own people, of Americans. They're cruel beyond imagination. I've seen photographs and even things that I've seen on the border just will curl your toenails. These people they're bloodthirsty. Everything is based on their profits. You get in the way of their profits, they will do bad things to you or your family. These are all things that I think need to be done. It's a drastic problem, and it is fixable though. It is fixable if you are determined to do it.
Thank you. I have more questions I could ask, but I want to give the audience a chance. If there's someone in the audience who wants to ask a question, let me just explain the ground rules first. Please identify yourself, and please keep it brief and short. Giving a speech that ends with, "Do you agree with me?" is not a question, okay? Sir, why don't you wait till you get a microphone?
Dennis Kirk, sir. I see this targeted redistribution of the people captured at the border into various, what I would call red states and cities, etc. And I fear, is that a political operation?
Well, I could certainly speak to that. I think it absolutely is a political operation. I think you've seen, we've spent, our federal government has spent about $340 million in transportation costs, flying these people around the country. I have seen it with my own eyes. I've flown on airplanes where you've got illegal aliens that are streaming onto the aircraft holding manila folders that say, "I don't speak English, point me to the right bus or to the right airplane." They have not been tested for COVID, many of these people. They have not been required to get COVID vaccinations, unlike American citizens. And they have been flown into various parts of the country that greatly suggest that they're there to be put on a path to citizenship and to tip the balance of the election process. And I think I'm not being extreme when I say that. I think it's an obvious ploy that it is political.
I'm reminded of that commercial they used to see for a consumer product that used to say, "Eat all you want, we'll make more." Well, if you can't persuade people to vote for you, I suppose you can make more voters just by letting illegal people into the nation and allowing them to vote in your state and local elections, maybe even federal, by changing your state laws in that regard.
Yeah, I got to add to that real quick.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 35 years, serving the country, as many people here, served under 6 administrations, both Republican and Democrat. And it's not with ease that I say this, is that with what I've seen, how this administration has destroyed our border and handed our borders over to the cartels, it simply defies logic and it defies common sense. So this past year, I've searched hard and long. Why would they do this? Why would they open the borders up, knowing that tens of thousands of Americans are dying every single month? The travesty, angel families. The governor mentioned the angel. I've talked to more angel families than I can remember, how they lost Americans and loved ones at the hands of illegal aliens. It goes on and on and on, the devastation. Why in the world would they do that? Unfortunately, I have to agree with the congressman. And it's not fun to agree with that at the end of the day, let's not forget about the census. They're playing the long game. Illegal aliens count part of the census now. So there's a potential redistricting of seats, right? And then they believe that part of their goal is, and they truly believe, that every single illegal alien that they find a pathway to citizenship is going to equate to a Democratic vote. That's where we're at right now. So we've actually handed over our borders to the cartels for a political advantage. It's disgusting.
Amen. Anyone else in the room? Over here in the front, there's someone coming with a mic for you.
Hey, excuse me. My name is Don Holman. I lost my son 5 years ago from an overdose to a synthetic opioid that he ordered online, was delivered in the mail from China. Uttam, I want to talk to you specifically, if you don't mind. The scheduling ban you talked about for analogs, I testified in 2020 to extend the scheduling ban. And I know that's my perception of that was that members of Congress, some are concerned that maybe lower level criminals, drug dealers, may be indirectly targeted. And so there, in my opinion, that was their hesitation on making it permanent. And then you mentioned the precursors as well as the analogs. So I didn't know if you could expand on some of that and explain maybe why is that not permanent now? Why do we continue to extend something that could give you the tools, or DEA the tools, and enforcement the tools to crack down on these higher level drug traffickers?
Yeah, if I said precursors, I was referring to analogs, the Analog Act, so I apologize for that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm puzzled at the failure to extend this. This is, I said, a no-brainer. There are various arguments about why not to do this. One is that some folks believe that it would prevent research on fentanyl analogs. But the truth is DEA would always allow that research to occur on Schedule I drugs. Research occurs every day on Schedule I drugs. So if the analogs were placed into Schedule I and a university wanted to research an analog and show that it had an actual medical purpose and move it into Schedule II, for example, they would be allowed to do that. So I have not heard a convincing argument as to why the Fentanyl Analogs Act should not be passed immediately. The big worry is, I mean, the cartels are so smart, they're so sophisticated, they have the ability to turn on a dime and start manufacturing these analogs, and we'll be flooded with them. And prosecutors, it's much harder to prosecute those individuals who are distributing those drugs. So it's not legal, but it's practically legal. I mean, which is why it's so important we do that. So, and I'm sorry about your loss.
Thank you. But a lot of people don't understand that analogs are just tweaking a recipe to make it go from illegal to not legal, over to legal.
Right.
So if you don't mind, if I could follow up with Mark on another comment. As I said, 5 years I've been involved in this. I'm in D.C. As I mentioned about testifying, I met other people within your organization, both of you, DEA and CBP, they've been great. 5 years ago, we were talking about China. They're sending stuff through the mail. We worked with the USPS. If I'm not mistaken, they actually did a better job of scheduling than we did. And that's what slowed down some of the stuff coming through the mail. So now it's coming through the southern border. 100% agree we need to control the border. I don't know if this is a question or a statement. I'm concerned, just like with China and the cartel, what's next? How do we forecast or predict that if we shut down the border, the next method of fentanyl or illicit drugs coming into our country? I personally think we need to look at the post office again and be prepared. If they can't come across the border, they're going to go that route again. And if we're prepared to handle that, maybe my question is, as we go throughout the country and we identify areas that drugs are being trafficked, are we capturing those physical addresses, putting it in our process center, running our analogs, so as packages come in, we see an increase, can we jump on that too? So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think your question's spot on, and I think it goes to what Uttam said. Make no mistake, the cartels, I used to say kind of tongue-in-cheek, is that they could go to Harvard Business School and teach a class at business resiliency and flexibility. They have the ability to change their TTPs, their techniques, tactics, and procedures better than a lot of major Fortune 500 companies do across the globe. So make no mistake, and that's what makes it complicated, right, is they will change. Just like, but Jim and Uttam and others were instrumental in the United States Postal Service, and the express consignment international mail that was coming through. And that's why I say part of the issue here is also a diplomatic one as well. All those things came combined. You saw a dramatic reduction in express consignment international mail, but they just changed, right? So then the precursors, they started coming directly to Mexico. They hired their own chemists, and they're just doing it for Mexico. We secure the physical land border. Make no mistake, they'll try to dig more tunnels. They'll use a maritime environment. They'll use more drones. They may go to other countries as well and try to reinstitute that. I think all of that above is going to happen. But it goes back to something Uttam said too. It's got to be a whole of government approach. We've got to get better at anticipating that and be able to apply an enforcement action. And one quick thing I'll say, because we mentioned, WMD's been mentioned, talking about terrorist organization, real quick. So I remember as a young FBI agent, I was there when 9/11 happened. I was, talking to my supervisor when the second tower fell. A few days later, I found myself standing at the Pentagon and then Ground Zero in New York. And there's so many things that struck me. But one thing that struck me is clearly we failed, right? We have to get a hell of a lot better at what we're doing and the way we're doing it, because there was a clear failure, right? And we could spend the next 2 hours talking about that. The reason why I bring that up is it really goes to the heart of what Uttam was saying about a whole of government approach, and then what the congressman saying was there's a lot of talk, should we declare the cartels a terrorist organization? This is what I'll say. I think that's open for debate, and we should talk about that, just like we should talk about WMD issues as well with the drugs. But here's what it should say, and this really goes to a foot stomp what Uttam said. We should apply the same concept that we apply with terrorism, right? The same whole of government approach, the same commitment, the same funding, the same kind of structure. Like right now, if you go to and not because it's been 20 years, it just happened to be this way, but the FBI is the lead, right, for counterterrorism operation. But it's a whole of government approach. I always said, look, I spent 20 years in the FBI, but I always said DEA should lead that effort, right? And we should set up a structure and have a structure and have a commitment. We should have, just like we have a joint terrorism task force that the whole United States is involved in. State, local, county, federal, are all involved with. They all know when a lead comes in, no matter how big or small, they know where it funnels into, and it's worked from a whole government approach, from intelligence to operation. It goes on and on. We should be doing the same thing with attacking the cartels. We're not there yet, and we should.
Gang, we've come up with, there's just a minute or two left. I want to give, Mark, if you don't mind, I think I want to give Uttam and the congressman a chance to give some closing remarks. The ones you just gave certainly fill that bill. Congressman, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to give?
Absolutely. I think that, first off, thank you, Paul. And thank you, Heritage, for having this. It's very valuable. This is a conversation and a dialogue that this country needs so very desperately. And it's amazing that, and several people have said it this morning, I know Mark did, how in the world could an administration that is sworn by oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of this country and to keep our borders secure and keep Americans and their property safe, allow a complete erasure, just completely erasing our southern border, and with all the concomitant, issues that go along with a border that's wide open. And this dialogue is invaluable to me, to be able to hear former DEA and border authorities be able to talk about this so that we can get ideas about what we need. As I said, I serve on the task force in the Republican conference to be ready and prepared with legislative ideas, initiatives when we do take the majority back, and I think we will. I really think we are getting ready to see a red tidal wave come over this nation here in this coming November. At least I'm praying to the good Lord that happens. And then we need to waste no time at all to reinstitute these things that absolutely, number one, we've got to get back to where we were in a cooperative agreement with our neighbor Mexico. If they're thumbing their nose at us, there's some real problem down there. If they're not allowing our DEA agents and other enforcement agents to, and not extraditing people that have committed crimes and have fled there or committed crimes in the United States, and then we have to send them back down there, I don't believe. But these remain in Mexico. All these issues, the legislative fixes that we mentioned as well, these are things that have to be done when we take the majority back. We will not have a friendly administration, I admit that completely, but if we can get if the American people, it's in their hands, in the hands of the American people, if they can give us veto-proof majorities in both houses, we can make these fixes. And also the American people can stand up until this administration. I'll give you an example. The Biden administration was absolutely adamant and would not be, their mind would not be changed on stopping of the purchase of Russian oil and gas. Well, we're providing Russia with about $50 to $60 million a day, purchasing their gas, basically financing their Ukrainian invasion. But guess what? Because of a public outcry, an uproar in public opinion, the Biden administration this past week has reversed course. And so that's what public opinion, that's what education, that's what heritage, and that's what a free and open media can do. And that is to change these minds and make sure that they do the things that would protect Americans.
Uttam?
A secure border will make all Americans safer. Let's take our border back from the drug cartels. And thank you for having this very important event.
My pleasure. Let me thank everyone here in the audience. Let me thank everyone who watched at home. And let me end just with a question to President Biden. President Biden, how many more Americans have to die before you stop playing a matador defense at the border? With that, let me say thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we hope that you'll come back for future events. We're adjourned.